Hasan Piker began his media career within a small YouTube startup associated with the Young Turks network, mainly motivated by a desire to move from New Jersey to Los Angeles. Initially involved in advertising operations through cold calls and managing client relationships, he gradually transitioned into an on-camera role despite lacking early confidence and skill in front of the camera. Persisting through initial struggles and skepticism, Hasan eventually developed as a leftist political commentator, gaining notable traction with his show, The Breakdown, which thrived amid Facebook's pivot to video content. Leveraging his interest in gaming, Hasan moved to Twitch, a platform primarily known for video gaming, to create a unique space combining gameplay with political discussion. He aimed to counterbalance the right-wing dominance in gaming culture, provide an engaging and fun progressive voice, and improve his off-the-cuff speaking skills by live-streaming gameplay mixed with political commentary. Hasan describes progressive values as being rooted in empathy and the upliftment of material conditions for all people, especially focusing on protecting vulnerable populations and unlocking human potential regardless of origin. He critiques capitalism for its inherent contradictions, primarily the exploitation of wage labor and global inequalities sustained by cheap labor in poorer countries, which depress wages and restrict upward mobility in wealthier nations. Hasan advocates for robust social safety nets as mechanisms to combat inequality and improve opportunities universally. He emphasizes that capitalism's profit motives hinder meaningful progress, particularly due to the need for cheap labor and natural resources, and he calls for an end to militarism and exploitation of the global South to foster global development and equity. Addressing concerns about immigration and its impact on domestic wages, Hasan acknowledges that immigrant labor can depress wages without proper regulations. He critiques systems like the H-1B visa program, which creates a vulnerable workforce prone to exploitation, thereby placing downward pressure on wages and working conditions for domestic laborers. Hasan proposes regulatory measures such as enforcing wage parity and protecting workers' rights to mitigate these effects. On low-skilled labor jobs, he stresses the inevitability of such roles, but envisions improvements through automation and better labor protections, arguing for fair wages, reasonable working hours, and ensuring workers maintain dignity and autonomy. He supports strong unions and sectoral bargaining as superior models to minimum wage laws, citing Nordic countries as examples where powerful labor participation leads to fair wages without statutory minimum wage requirements. Hasan expresses a nuanced view on socialism and authoritarianism, acknowledging that many countries, regardless of ideology, exhibit authoritarian tendencies often exacerbated by external geopolitical pressures. He draws parallels to historical U.S. actions of suppressing dissent during wartime, highlighting that authoritarian measures are not exclusive to socialist states. Regarding countries often held as negative examples, such as Venezuela and Cuba, he urges a differentiated understanding of each country's unique historical and social context. He points to China as a more balanced and successful example of socialist governance, despite its flaws and mixed capitalist elements, noting its industrial advancement and mass poverty reduction. Hasan stresses that authoritarianism is not an inevitable outcome of socialism, but often a result of concentrated power and external threats. Hasan posits China as the closest contemporary example of effective socialist governance, highlighting its rapid modernization and poverty alleviation under the Communist Party's leadership. He categorizes China as a mixed economy with substantial state control paired with capitalist market elements, a model mirrored to some extent in Western countries like the US and the UK, which also feature mixed economies with social safety nets and private enterprise. Hasan critiques American political and economic stagnation, contrasting it with China's ongoing infrastructure and scientific development, and laments the lack of ambition and investment in the U.S. He suggests that sustained sovereignty and improved material conditions in any country tend to increase tolerance and civil liberties over time. The discussion covers the social attitudes surrounding immigration and national identity, particularly in the UK. Hasan argues that economic instability and underfunded public services fuel resentment, and that much anti-immigrant sentiment arises as a scapegoating mechanism rather than a legitimate threat. He distinguishes between successful assimilation in countries like the US, where second and third generation immigrants generally integrate well, and challenges faced in the UK, exemplified by concerns over Islamist radicalization among some communities. Hasan attributes these issues primarily to economic hardship and inadequate public services, which create fertile ground for division and political manipulation, especially by right-wing groups. Hasan responds critically to claims about Islamist extremism in Western countries. While acknowledging some polls indicating portions of British Muslims may support conservative or religious laws, e.g., some support for Sharia or bans on homosexuality, he challenges broad generalizations, emphasizing that the majority do not endorse extremist views. He highlights that similar anti-LGBT+ sentiments exist on the political right in Western societies, arguing that fear of Islamism is often exaggerated and instrumentalized for political purposes. The conversation touches on the political influence of sectarian parties, but frames it within a broader debate on integration, tolerance, and social cohesion. Hasan clarifies that while he does not label himself a communist, he does not reject the ideology's ultimate goals, viewing communism as a utopian ideal most likely achievable only on an international scale. He contrasts the theoretical stateless, classless society with historical attempts, such as the Soviet Union's model, which failed to realize those goals and instead resulted in authoritarian states marked by repression and brutality. Hasan emphasizes learning from past failures while pursuing forms of governance that uplift populations materially without resorting to tyranny. He dismisses simplistic conflations of socialism with communism, asserting that many proponents advocate mixed economies and social democracy rather than revolutionary communism. Hasan contends that authoritarianism emerges more readily in countries facing systemic threats, insecurity, or lack of sovereignty, as illustrated by examples like Venezuela or Turkey. He notes that liberal democracies like the US enjoy relative freedoms partly because of geopolitical dominance, while waning influence risks greater repression domestically. Hasan warns of existing encroachments on civil liberties in the US, citing increased surveillance, political targeting of dissenters, and suppression of protest as symptomatic of this decline. He highlights the dangers of slipping into authoritarian tendencies even in Western democracies if economic instability and social unrest deepen. Discussing the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk, Hasan expresses shock and sorrow, emphasizing the fear many media figures on both sides share regarding political violence. He explains how widespread anger, particularly stemming from systemic healthcare failures, fuels extreme reactions, some of which manifest as violent revenge. Hasan critiques the privatized American healthcare system for causing widespread suffering and frustration, which can distort public sentiment around such incidents. He warns that such violence is a symptom of deeper systemic problems and urges legislative and systemic reforms to prevent further destabilization and retaliatory acts. Hasan elaborates on concerns about freedom of expression and government overreach in the U.S., highlighting instances where the Trump administration expanded surveillance on left-wing groups labeled as extremist and increased charges against activists. He stresses that designating movements like Antifa as domestic terrorist organizations violates constitutional protections. Hasan points out the ambiguous and expansive criteria used to target various types of political and social dissent. He fears that erosion of free speech and due process in response to political violence risks paving the way to more overt authoritarianism. Addressing the contentious use of terms like fascist and communist in contemporary political discourse, Hasan acknowledges the power these labels carry and their potential to escalate tensions. He justifies using such language to describe parties or movements exhibiting tendencies historically linked to fascism, warning against normalizing authoritarian shifts under democratic facades. Nonetheless, he advocates exhausting democratic and political means to address these issues before resorting to resistance or confrontation. Hasan cautions that irresponsible or inaccurate labeling risks fueling further political violence by placing targets on people's backs, underscoring the need for careful communication. Hasan identifies the Reform Party in the UK as a nascent far-right group exhibiting proto-fascist characteristics, though not yet fully realized as an authoritarian force. He draws parallels with historical fascist movements, emphasizing the danger posed when material conditions deteriorate and instability prompts calls for order restoration through illiberal means. He warns that nationalist parties, even if currently moderate, could shift toward authoritarianism if economic and social crises intensify. Hasan advocates vigilant opposition to such political trends through democratic methods, hoping to prevent escalation into outright fascism. Highlighting a topic not fully explored due to time constraints, Hasan mentions Israel's political developments as an example of governance exhibiting patterns related to fascism, paralleling trends in Western liberal democracies. Although not elaborated extensively, this suggests an interest in discussing how national security, ethnic tensions, and political control intersect to shape state behavior and civil liberties in contested regions.